The ovarian cycle consists of all of the events that occur within an ovary after puberty. It is regulated by the hormones LH and FSH. On average, the cycle lasts 28 days and consists of two phases. The first phase is the follicular phase. This is a time when the follicle, with its oocyte, grows and develops. It occurs during the first 14 days of the ovarian cycle. On day 14, the oocyte is released from the ovary during ovulation. After ovulation, the second phase begins, called the luteal phase. This occurs between days 14 to 28. During the luteal phase, the corpus luteum is formed. Recall that during fetal development, oogonia, which are your stem cells, undergo mitosis to produce primary oocytes. Those primary oocytes are housed within primordial follicles. The cells that make up the wall of the follicles are called follicular cells, and they are simple squamous. In this histology slide, you can see primordial follicles. There's one here, another one there, and a third one there. The follicular cells are these cells here that make up the wall of the follicle, and you can see that they are flat cells, thus they are simple squamous. Inside the follicle, all of this is going to be the primary oocyte. This structure here represents the nucleus of the primary oocyte. At puberty, a cohort or group of primordial follicles are selected to continue their maturation to become primary follicles. The follicular cells will change from simple squamous cells to simple cuboidal or columnar cells, and they're located here. The oocyte begins to release some glycoproteins which form a zona pellucida between the oocyte, and this entire structure is the primary oocyte with its nucleus, and these are the follicular cells. The zona pellucida will be this area right in here. Proteins on the sperm must bind to some of these glycoproteins for fertilization to occur. Highlighted now are the follicular cells, and that is the primary oocyte. Follicle continues to grow. The cells proliferate. Recall that that means that they divide to form a stratified layer. Once the stratified layer appears, the follicular cells will be called granulosa cells. If I look at this histology slide, you can see I have multiple layers of cells here making up the follicle wall. These cells now will be the granulosa cells. The zona pellucida continues to thicken and become more visible. And you can see that line here. This structure is the primary oocyte with its nucleus. In addition, another structure called the theca folliculi will form outside of the granulosa cells. So it will go all the way around here. And it will consist of epithelial cells as well as connective tissue cells. And I have drawn the red to indicate where it would be located. Fluid begins to accumulate between the granulosa cells. A cavity called the antrum with the fluid appears. At this point, the secondary follicle is a vesicular follicle. The fluid surrounds most of the oocyte, although there is a column of granulosa cells here, and the granulosa cells that are around the oocyte initially remain with the oocyte. The granulosa cells that remain with the oocyte will make up the corona radiata. These cells have gap junctions that will allow nutrients and waste products to travel between the corona radiata and the oocyte. They also provide protection for the oocyte. One vesicular follicle will become dominant and it will continue the process of maturation. The other vesicular follicles will not survive. The epithelial layer of the theca follicula is called the theca interna. The cells here have receptors for the hormone LH or luteinizing hormone. In response to LH, these cells take up cholesterol from the blood and convert the cholesterol into androgens. The granulosa cells will have receptors for the hormone FSH or follicle stimulating hormone. In response to FSH, these cells will take the androgens that were produced by the theca interna cells and convert those into estrogens. Let's take a look at this histology slide. These are the granulosa cells. They're going to make up an area called the zona granulosa. The cells that were originally around the oocyte surrounding it become the corona radiata, and the liquid-filled cavity is called the antrum. If you take a look here, you can notice the oocyte as well as the zona pellucida. In response to LH, the primary oocyte located within the vesicular follicle will complete meiosis I, giving rise to a polar body and a secondary oocyte. The polar body will not survive. The secondary oocyte will begin meiosis II, but will not complete it. The oocyte released during ovulation will be this secondary oocyte arrested in meiosis II. If and only if fertilization occurs, is meiosis II completed, and the secondary oocyte will give rise to a polar body and an ovum or egg. There are three types of estrogens. Estrone, which is the prominent estrogen present in the blood during menopause. Menopause is the period of time after ovulation ceases. There are no longer any primordial follicles with their primary oocytes present. Due to atresia, only around 400 oocytes are released during ovulation throughout the life of the female. The second type of estrogen is estradiol. This is the dominant estrogen during the reproductive years. The third type of estrogen, estrol, will be elevated in the blood during pregnancy. Ovulation is triggered by a surge in the hormone LH in the plasma. We'll look at this in more detail in just a minute. During ovulation, the secondary oocyte, which is seen here, along with the zona pellucida and the corona radiata, are all released together. After ovulation, the luteal phase begins. The antrum of the ruptured follicle collapses and fills with blood. At this point, it is called the corpus hemorrhagicum. The corpus hemorrhagicum then develops into a corpus luteum. The corpus luteum is maintained by luteinizing hormone. It will function as an endocrine structure and will consist of the granulosa cells and the theca interna cells. The corpus luteum will release primarily progesterones, but also estrogens and inhibins. As these levels increase in the blood, they will inhibit the release of LH. This is a histology slide of a corpus luteum. You can also see a vesicular follicle here, a secondary follicle, and this is an early vesicular follicle. The fluid is beginning to collect. Recall that this cavity filled with fluid is called the antrum. If pregnancy occurs, the corpus luteum continues to release progesterone, estrogen, and inhibin. Progesterone is necessary to maintain the functional layer of the endometrium. Increased levels of progesterone, estrogen, and inhibin inhibit the release of LH. In order to maintain the corpus luteum during this 3-month period, cells associated with the embryo release human chorionic gonadotropin. HCG has 4 actions: to continue to maintain the corpus luteum so that progesterone is released, to increase angiogenesis, this increases the uterine vasculature. In addition, HCG prevents immune cells from attacking the embryo. Recall that the genetic makeup of the embryo is unique and different from a mother's somatic cells and are therefore seen as foreign cells. The 4th action of HCG is to stimulate the growth of the uterus as well as the umbilical cord. If no pregnancy occurs, the corpus luteum will degenerate in about 10 days. The remnant of the corpus luteum is called the corpus albicans.